Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar where we're going to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in FinTech. I'm Amelia Martinez, Director of Ecosystem at Innovate Finance, the independent industry body for FinTech companies in the UK. And today I'm delighted to be joined by our outstanding speakers. Hannah Dobson, UK FinTech lead and partner in direct tax at KPMG. Roshini Dhaliwal, CHRO Clearbank. Lucas Germanos, Vice President, Communications and External Affairs at Zoba Bank. Tara Ryan, Vice President of People Experience at Monzo. And our incredible moderator, Lauren Taylor, Associate Director, FinTech at KPMG. Just before we start, the duration of this webinar is going to be 60 minutes. Speakers will be presenting first, and then there will be a few minutes at the end for some questions. So if you want to send us your questions via the chat and the Q&A section, please feel free to do so. And we wanted to let you know, also be aware that this webinar is going to be recorded. And well, that's it for now. So without further ado, I would like to thank you again for joining us. And I will leave you now in the expert hands of Hannah Dobson, partner at KPMG, who is going to be setting the scene for this webinar. And then we're going to go to the panel. So thank you so much. And Hannah, all yours.
Thank you very much, Amelia, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be part of this panel, actually, about a discussion that's very, very close to my heart. And as we look forward to the future of the FinTech market, one of the most impactful developments will be the continued evolution of diversity and inclusion. Unlocking the true power of the financial technology market requires a market and people working in it that come from a diverse range of perspectives and backgrounds. So it's super important that we focus on diversity and inclusion. So without further ado, I'm going to hand to my wonderful colleague, Lauren, who's going to moderate the panel for us today. Lauren.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Hannah. And just wanted to say a big thank you to Innovate Finance for giving us the opportunity to be involved in this webinar on such an important topic. So I'd like to start with you, Lucas. Why do you think diversity, equity and inclusion is such an important part of building a successful business? And can you tell us a little bit about the initiatives you have in place at Zopa with regard to diversity and inclusion?
Thanks for the question, Lauren, and I'm very excited to see such a wonderful panel and Innovate Finance continuing to champion diversity with its webinars and its power lists and all of its activities. So it's really great to be with you today. So look, fundamentally, I think that financial services products are used by people from all walks of life. And so we at Zopa think that it is important to reflect this diversity in our culture and in our services, and to build simple and fair products that meet the needs of all our customers. So not just a small, tiny representative sample. I would also say that diversity leads to better business decisions. There's extensive research that shows diverse companies are more innovative, they're more creative, they're more productive, and they're more profitable by bringing different and diverse voices to the table. And so there's different ways of kind of enabling this diversity. I can walk you briefly on what we do at Zopa. We try to promote diversity at all levels across our organization. And so the way we look at it is either through external partnerships or internal initiatives, and also through hardwiring diversity into our hiring processes. A few examples come to mind. We have now built a multi-year partnership with Code First Girls to offer female and non-binary people degrees in data, software, and product management. And this has already led to many job offers directly with Zopa. So that's kind of us going directly to market early on to enable a diverse pool of candidates. And then we also work with Bright Network, supporting representation from ethnic minorities and people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. In terms of hardwiring diversity processes, we remove gender bias like quite a few other companies in our industry nowadays, by decoding our job ads, by delivering training for managers, and by ensuring gender diverse candidate lists and interview panels with a 50-50 hiring pipeline. And so as a result, today, our employees hail from 46 countries around the world. 1 in 2 senior Zopa managers are women, and 25% of our employees identify as ethnically diverse. And I'm very proud to say that 90% recommend Zopa as a great place to work, and that also we've been voted one of the UK's most loved workplaces for the 3 years in a row that just went on.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Ross, it'd be great to hear about the initiatives at ClearBank, and in particular, the focus on flexibility across your workforce.
Yeah, absolutely happy to share, and really amazing stats that Lucas just shared, so very inspiring. And I'm really passionate about this subject. So what I love about ClearBank is we recently did a big piece of work, our employee value proposition. And one of the things our colleagues say they really like about our culture is that this is a place where they can be themselves. So it really kind of lives true to the experience here. I can talk a bit about flexibility and family leave. The work we've done there is probably a good example, but I would just be clear that I feel really passionately that flexibility is for all. And so that we think about this really holistically, but I can talk a little bit about family leave. The thing that we found really important here, actually, I think, is not assuming that we know what works best for people. So actually talking to our colleagues about how these important life moments have been for them and where they may need a bit more support. So we did that, and we introduced a series of changes where we enhanced our maternity leave. We increased our paternity leave from 2 weeks to 6, and we made the decision to say you can use it at any point in the first year of a child's life to really help the familial structure. We recognize that adoption is such an important experience, and actually a lot of people don't get the same amount of time for that. So we've leveled that out with our maternity and paternity. We thought about making it eligible more quickly for people, so it's not a restrictive barrier on joining an organization if you're going through one of those life moments, and then introducing things like fertility treatment, miscarriage support, neonatal support. As I mentioned, I think it does go beyond this, and I think flexibility is a benefit that enables inclusivity for all. So we really think about that broadly in terms of, we trust you to work in a way that works for you. You can flex your public holidays if you want to celebrate Diwali rather than Christmas. Go for it. There is that flex, there is that trust, and you can also take time during the year to do things with communities that work for you, and that we're passionate about that. It's coincidental, but we also work with Co-First Girls, so I can absolutely advocate for them as an organisation, and we're really passionate about making sure that we're planning for the future. So we really do a lot on our senior hiring, but also, so I think, Lucas, it's great you guys are working with them as well, but it's been brilliant to see women join our organisation, getting into technology, taking career risks, but having the right support system around them. I could talk for ages, but I'm conscious of time. But another thing I guess I would call out is, I think with every reorganization or expansion, and we've just expanded internationally, there's a real opportunity to consider diversity and equity and inclusion. So we've just gone global, and we set up a European bank and a UK bank. That was a really important moment to think about making sure that we consider that in the construction of those teams. So for our European team, really proud to say that half the board is female. And for the UK bank, we've got over half female representation, female chair, female CEO, and they're all the absolutely best people for the job. But it really comes with thinking deliberately and working with headhunters that care about diversity. So there are a few things, and happy to talk more as we go.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Tara, could we come to you next, please? Could you tell us a little bit about the progress that's been made at Monzo, and specifically the role that data's played in this?
Yeah, absolutely. So from really early days at Monzo, we knew that DE&I was going to be a core pillar of our success, and we wanted to, represent the customers that we have and also the areas where we live and work. But ultimately, you can't know that without data. And it started off quite, I will say, jankily, to be honest with you. Google Forms, people volunteering their information and so on. But over time, we knew we had to be much more systematic about it to understand not only like who's here, but also how they feel about things, and then also what roles and positions they sit in within the company. And that was a really hard journey, to be honest with you. I think anyone who's tried to collect data post GDPR has come across a lot of roadblocks, and again, for good reason. But we're very blessed at Monzo to have a really, really great data protection team who really care deeply about DE&I. And so we worked with them really closely to make sure that, everything was above board and done in the appropriate way, so that we could go out to Monzonauts, and sorry, we call Monzo people who work at Monzo Monzonauts. We could go out to folks who work at Monzo and say, hey, you have to trust us to tell us who you are. And we have to earn that trust and show you that we're doing something appropriate, with that data, and you can see meaningful change. And when we first did it, we were like, oh, we're not sure. Are people going to give it to us? And actually, consistently since that moment, we've had 85% fulfillment rate. And we're collecting a lot of special category data. We're not just asking about gender, ethnicity. We're also asking about mental health status. We're asking about neurodiversity. We're asking about social class and so on, because we know that diversity is represented in many different forms. We want to be able to make sure that we have the appropriate interventions. And once we started to collect that data, it forced, well, we were going to do it anyway, but it does force you to hold yourself accountable to, okay, what are you actually doing? And for nearly 10 years now, Monzo has been publicly posting our DE&I report. And we do this, to hold ourselves accountable to our staff, but also to our customers who we know care very deeply about seeing themselves represented at the bank. And we also then are able to look at and introduce safety measures, such as when we go through performance and review season, we can then overlay DE&I data to say, hey, are there specific groups who aren't getting promoted as quickly as we would expect, or aren't getting the same performance ratings as other groups, and so on, and really dig down into, if that is the case, why that is. And then it also gives us a greater view around engagement at Monzo and how specific people feel. And so at the moment, we have overall ENPS engagement of 50, and then DE&I satisfaction at 62, which is in the top 10% of industry, which is wonderful. But it also means that then when we are going up to leadership and asking for whether it's investment or commitment of time from them, we've got the proof behind it to support why we're asking. And now at this point, at this specific point in time, we have 22% of all senior leaders at Monzo are people of colour. When we look at our exco and board currently is 66% representation of women. At exco is 35% of women. And we've been able to evolve our strategy over time. We started off thinking about representation, who's here, but then we were able to tailor our approach to say, okay, how can we introduce new initiatives or remove barriers so that different people are able to move up through the organization over time, so that diversity is represented throughout the organization. And honestly, it's been wonderful, because it means that people can really see the proof in the pudding of, like, when we do something, it leads to this outcome. And it's also meant that, whether you are in the people team or whether you're a manager at Monzo, you're able to take accountability for that ongoing commitment to drive diversity and inclusion as an organization.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Tara. Hannah, could we come to you next, please? Could you talk to us a little bit about the focus on diversity, equity and inclusion at KPMG, and in particular in our FinTech practice? And then perhaps a little bit about what you think larger organisations like a KPMG can learn from earlier stage businesses and vice versa.
Yes, thank you very much, Lauren. We are obviously, as everyone knows, a sort of huge organisation here at KPMG, and there is a focus on all things diversity and inclusion. It's super important for us as a business. There's 19,000 employees across the UK, so it's very important that we have that focus. Our values at KPMG are numerous, but two of them that are very important to me are together and for better, and that really sort of sinks in that inclusion and that diversity, that we are all in it together, no matter what background we are actually from. We do a number of things, initiatives here at KPMG. I'm sure we could always do more, but certainly things that stick out for me in particular. We're co-sponsors of the FTSE Women Leaders Review. We're advocates for gender diversity in that FTSE 350 space. But of course, that is very much at the sort of bigger end of the market. So KPMG itself, we now have 50-50 representation male-female on our UK board, which I've been watching change over a number of years, and I'm super proud that we have that. We have a fabulous UK chair in Bina Mita, obviously a female and from an ethnically diverse background. And our UK Swiss board now is actually also chaired by Melissa Geiger. So we've made huge strides over recent years to see some of that diversity really at the top of KPMG and driving change down through the business. We have a number of internal networks here. So there's 17 at the last count, from our female networks to our Black heritage networks to other sort of networks that are there to support people that have sort of common goals and common backgrounds between them. And a particular key area of focus for the firm over recent years has been around social mobility. So in 2021, we were one of the first large organisations in the UK to report on our socio-economic background and gaps that we have there. And it's a true focus for us now when we go through that recruitment process. about making sure that we look to see where people of all sorts of things that have been to school, where they've grown up, to make sure there are opportunities for all. I guess our FinTech team here at KPMG, Lauren, which you know very well, not at all by design and unusual for our financial services business here at KPMG. All of the leadership of our FinTech team are actually women. So obviously myself leading that team, Lauren, part of that leadership team, and various parts of the team, not at all, as I say, by design, but actually all led by women. And I often ask myself the question as to why that is, and there's no particular reason. It's always best person for the job as far as I'm concerned. But I like to think that we've created an environment where everybody feels included and safe, and a safe place to speak out, and perhaps that attracts people with that diverse background into that environment. What can we learn from the FinTech market at KPMG? Loads, even just listening now to Rosh, to Tara, to Lucas. And something in particular that stuck out for me from what Tara was saying is around the use of data. So we do gather data here at KPMG about our diversity and inclusion statistics. But I do definitely think we could do better at taking that data and using it to drive better outcomes. And what else could we do to show to people that the data is meaningful, if you will, and we're actually making change as a result. So that's something in particular that stuck out for me, Lauren. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hannah. Roshi, I'd like to also bring you in here, as prior to ClearBank, you worked in much larger organisations. It'd be good to hear your reflections about what larger organisations can learn from FinTechs, and equally kind of the other way as well.
Yeah, sure. I think it's really fortunate to have seen both sides, because to your point, there are absolute merits on both sides. So just to contextualise first, I used to work at, my last roles were at Barclays, obviously a pretty huge, large global multinational. I think the beauty, and that can be a gift and a curse in large corporates, and I don't know if you guys recognise this at KPMG, is you have really strong infrastructure to lean on. There's lots of best practice, expertise, resource, typically strong analytics tools to start from. So your baseline is strong. There tends to be, in my experience, a very programmatic approach, therefore, and the right level of resource to really be extremely structured and outcome focused. And you have a strong platform. So all of that stuff is great from, let's call it, a maturity perspective. When I was in a larger organization, and I think this is just a bit, reflects where we are in time, a lot of the journey was spent on awareness and buy-in. So I'm really reassured to feel like that doesn't feel like where we are now. It feels like we're in the space of action. But what I've really enjoyed from kind of taking this same spirit in a FinTech environment is innovation being at the heart of what we do. I think that drives a real openness to test and learn and iterate. So rather than to need for something to be perfect and an excellent quality solution immediately, I see a lot more openness to try and test. And I think everyone on this call will know that DEI isn't an easy journey. Sometimes there can be nervousness about getting it right, and that can drive a bit of paralysis or playing it safe in a larger corporate. So what I've seen is greater license to drive change and experiment. I think the FinTech environment, what's great is it encourages you to get creative and to think outside of the box if you don't have that huge infrastructure to rely upon. So you have to really think about using your network and building strong partnerships. So Flex is a great business that we've worked with to do an active strategy to build diverse talent pools that I probably wouldn't have thought about in a large company, because we had huge teams to do things like that for us. But actually, we've been able to get an accreditation, tap into a much broader pool of talent who are looking specifically for flexibility. And then I would say, I think in a smaller company, so ClearBank, we're around 800 people, the colleague voice is just very naturally more at the center, and it's easier to be close to. So I think in a large company, you can get a strong strategy and you can get strong buy-in from the top, but actually making sure you truly embed that, it's difficult to control and be everywhere. So I've really enjoyed being able to see it in practice in a smaller organization and being able to make sure that's real. I think one takeaway that I would say I have from working in larger organizations now and smaller is, I personally, and everybody does it differently, feel quite strongly that DEI should be a horizontal that runs across everything rather than a separate pillar in I think that's really important to make sure it's a part of everything you do and every process, rather than something that's knocking on the door for each subject matter. And in a smaller organization in a fintech, that's more natural as a reflection of your structures that you have. So I see that working very effectively.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And very interesting to hear kind of both sides of things there. So thank you. Lucas, when we were preparing for this webinar, you spoke about how many organisations have successfully created a safe space for a diverse workforce. But how can businesses develop this further and progress to a culture where colleagues are empowered to bring their true selves to work?
I would probably start with where we are and what we have. And so when you look at the UK ecosystem, our country is home to just over tech unicorns, 2,500 fintech companies, some 90,000 financial and professional firms, really combining the best of Silicon Valley and New York in one single place. And so with 75,000 people working in fintech across the UK, and that number of UK fintech workers expected to grow to just over 100,000 by 2030, I think the foundational question is, how do we reflect this diversity of talent in skills and backgrounds into our products? And I think DE&I is one kind of way in. And it's really about giving an equal opportunity to thrive to your people and to bring your best self to work. So not just create safe spaces, but create safe spaces where people feel truly empowered to bring their true and best self. And there is a difference in between these two notions. So as a manager of people, some small things can fundamentally have a big impact on your teams. And that's because you need to get to know your people. You have to look at the entire journey of people in your organization. We spoke about this earlier. I think that the diversity data strategy needs to understand the organization as it is and the people journey in it. And then you have to change the process, being thoughtful up and down the chain to get there. A couple of examples come to mind, and maybe I'll just limit myself to one. I think specifically senior sponsors in organizations have a role to play and a choice to make. A role of connecting, empowering, and embedding diversity in the boardroom and across the organization, and a choice to either sit back and passively observe or take a stance and an intentional approach to diversity. Maybe one area that I've worked on that is relevant to this, I can speak to, is our diversity initiatives in the LGBT plus space. Last year alone, we've organized several talks, including a deep dive on the history of the Pride movement and a discussion on trans inclusion with a well-known activist. We have also partnered with Intertech to present a financial literacy panel for 85 engineers who came to the Zopo office to network and to find out more about building financial resilience. And also, one of our latest initiatives is the Trans Advocacy Group, again, thinking about senior sponsors, who has come together to identify the needs of our trans and non-binary colleagues. And I think these kind of initiatives, bringing together policy people, human resources people, a senior sponsor to really drive recommendations that better support the community is the way to go forward. On top of that, if we think about the external ecosystem, we continue to be passionate supporters of the Pride in FinTech Power List that Innovate Finance launched that highlights the stories of talented LGBT professionals across our industry. And so if this is just one vertical in the queer or LGBT plus Q space, then you can replicate that in different segments as we do with our women in business sector and also others.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So Tara, when we were preparing for this, you said that actually a lot of policies can be quite reductive and don't always address the systemic problems in an organisation. And you made the point that culture is the worst behaviour we tolerate, which has really stuck with me. How can businesses ensure they avoid this and kind of work towards more meaningful engagement?
Yeah, that is my favorite quote, is culture is the worst behavior that you tolerate in an organization. And the reason for that is that I think that it can be really harmful if you make a very big deal about, for example, DE&I being a big focus for you as an organization. And then once people come through the door, they find that not to be the case, and where they were hoping to experience, safety and belonging, and to really thrive in an organization, or for them to be supported hopefully for the first time. No, sorry, not hopefully, but supported in a way they want. If that isn't the case, that's really harmful for people. And so I am a big advocate for the fact that culture is not what it says on your careers website. Culture isn't really even what your CEO says or your VP of people or anything like that. Culture is everyday local moments, right? Who speaks in a meeting, how other people create space for other people, how a manager asks the person that they're supporting, how can I best support you? And I think it is, to Rosh's point, like, D&I can't be housed in one role or one section of the organization. It has to be something that everybody takes as, their responsibility, because actually, when you think about inclusion and belonging, that is person to person. And sure, the role of the people function is to design policies and all those other things, and that plays a huge role. But actually, all of that can mean nothing if actually your manager, your personal manager, does not feel like they care about it, or when the CEO is standing in front of the town hall or the all hands and clearly makes you feel like they don't care about it, or that the board has never asked about D&I representation or any of the initiatives. And so that's why I think it's important to embed it fully in your organization. And that can be hard, right? Because everybody has different views, different levels of commitment and passion, but you can embed it into your performance processes. You can embed it into your learning and development for management and leadership, but also you can reward it and make it really clear that folks who do invest the time and want to, make a difference do get rewarded, are seen as, leaders in the company, whether they hold a leadership position or not. And ultimately, I think that drives engagement and feelings of belonging overall. And obviously, I spoke a little bit about data beforehand, but people can then see it in the data that, your D&I scores are, like, your D&I representation is higher, your engagement is higher, your satisfaction is higher. And then ultimately that becomes a strategic play, because you see that your business outcomes should be better as you have people. It's not, someone who used to work at Monzo used to say, it's not about just being like at the party, it's being invited to dance. And I would take it like that one step further and say, it's not just being invited to dance, it's knowing that you belong at the party in the first place, right? And like feeling free to say no if you don't want to, right? And I think my whole focus at Monzo has always been to make it so that people feel that they have an invitation and that they can say yes or no to whatever that may be, but creating it so that people have multiple invitations to, show up, thrive, and succeed at Monzo. Whatever that may mean to them, whether it's like in how they perform or how they interact, like socially or anything like that. But from the policy perspective, because I realized that was the beginning of the question, we have always designed policies at a very high level, and have essentially said to people contain multitudes. If I'll take a bereavement policy, for example. For some folks, losing their parents will be the biggest loss they ever experience. For other people, they don't have a relationship with their parents, and maybe it's an aunt, or maybe it was their next door neighbor, or whatever the case may be. And making it so that people can tell you what they need and making sure that you're able to support them, ultimately, to me, is what inclusion is, right? Is that we don't tell you, what you need, you tell us, but we create the framework around it so that you can choose, well, let's say the invitation to choose for yourself. I think that there is a downside to that, and I've experienced that at Monzo, where if you've worked in other places where people have had very prescriptive policies, and then you don't see yourself written in it, you can then think that you're just not included. And so we have started to become more, I suppose, detailed in some instances. We introduced a pregnancy loss policy, for example, and also a family forming policy, because we knew that people weren't taking time off to go for IVF. And then also where a man in the relationship, their partner was going through IVF, they didn't think that they could take time off. And I was like, well, of course you can. You're both going through that journey. That's impactful to both of you in different ways, probably. But protected time away is important, regardless of what that situation looks like. And we try to embed that thought process across all policies and support structures around Monzo, just because, as you say, that's how it very clearly from the top, but then also individually shows that D&I is woven into everything that we do.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Tara. So a question for all of you now. What do you think is next for diversity, equity and inclusion in the fintech industry, and what needs to be prioritised? Hannah, perhaps we could come to you first, please.
All right, Lauren, thank you. I suppose I almost need to talk about this from a little KPMG looking into the fintech industry perspective, I would say. But people in the industry, everyone on the panel that actually works in it can talk far more about that sort of fintech space. But I would say certainly looking in from a KPMG perspective, we need to make sure that we have the ability to inspire people to take career opportunities in all walks of life. So I know certainly many years ago when I was starting out in my career, actually I was looking for role models. I was looking for people to inspire me to work in a particular place and see that I had a career that had longevity. So I think, seeing role models in the fintech space, in leadership positions, in all forms of life from all diverse backgrounds is super important. But I also think, both for bigger industry and for the fintech industry, to actually have a wider sort of bucket of people to choose from, to recruit from. I know that actually if we're going to get people from all diversity and inclusion to work in particular industries, we have to have people that are from all forms of background, that see that they have an opportunity to apply for these roles and actually work in this particular space. So I think it's opening up the opportunities. It's making sure that, perhaps in schools, people see that this industry might be something that they want to do. I mean, I walked into the office through Canary Wharf this morning and I saw that you can actually do an MSc in FinTech at a particular university in London. So it's kind of growing up people to actually make sure that they see a career in this particular space and that there are opportunities for all. But again, looking up and seeing those role models that exist in the fintech environment as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Hannah. Rosh, could we come to you next in terms of what you think's next for the industry?
Yeah, sure. And Hannah had some great thoughts there. So I agree in terms of one thing we're thinking about is just really thinking broadly about where you take talent from. And fintech's at such a nice intersection point because there are so many ways you can go and so many transferable skills. So I think really trying to show the benefits and the enjoyment that a career in fintech can offer, and being therefore really open-minded to people from other industries and backgrounds, brings diversity of profile, but also thoughts. I think that's really important. Completely agree with Hannah on kind of role modeling and that being important. That said, I do think that there's often quite a lot of focus at senior representation from a diversity perspective, and I feel really strongly that you have to start somewhere to totally understand it. And I didn't have that growing up, so I love that we have it now. But I think we need to be looking at it from all angles and really thinking sustainably. So making sure we're thinking about entry-level talent, how we develop talent through an organization. And then finally, something that I've heard Tara talk about before, intersectionality. So in the sense of, I think it's so hard to get this right because we care passionately about everything. But what I really, and I don't have the magic answer, but it's very easy for one to become more, to have targets and for that to actually compromise other strands of diversity. So that requires really a lot of thought in terms of thinking about how we want everything to show up and what that might look like. And it might mean that you don't achieve your women in senior leadership target, but you're valuing all forms of diversity. And I think getting comfortable with that is really important and one of the harder points.
Fantastic. Thank you. Lucas?
I would really echo what Roshini just said. We can't get everything right and perfect from, the get-go. But I think in a rapidly changing macro and geopolitical environment, especially as far as diversity is concerned, I think that businesses need to become a little bit more intentional. And so instead of rushing to, own Pride in June or something else like a kind of women or female representation initiative across the board, I would really kind of see a good way forward to be very intentional with maybe the one, maybe the two, maybe the three initiatives that a business can run within a calendar year, and set specific timeframes to complete some of these initiatives, to get them through their board, to explain them properly to their employees, to make sure that they're adopted and it doesn't just stay kind of a policy document somewhere in the cloud. And so I would invite companies to think carefully about what these 1, 2, 3 things may be, focus on that, and then work across the industry with initiatives such as the Women in Finance Power List, the Pride Power List as well, with our industry bodies, either this being Innovate Finance or another one, to really think about, okay, how can we amplify these few initiatives that we're running, and how can we learn from one another in such a rich ecosystem of backgrounds and initiatives.
Fantastic, thank you. And Tara, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I just say when Rosh was speaking, I just want to be like, yes, like it's essentially everything that I would like to say. I honestly think intersectionality has to be the focus, because I think for so long we think about D&I as like we're targeting this specific group or that specific group, and we're doing this to help with, solve this problem. But actually, I think we're really missing an opportunity to really leverage passion throughout the entire organization as it relates to D&I, because it's very rare that when you do something for one specific group of people, or try and introduce an intervention for one specific group of people, other people aren't benefiting. And I think that being able to really clearly articulate, we've done this thing and the intent potentially was for one specific group of people, but actually these are all the other unintended benefits that come from it. And so, when I think about introducing some of the tools that you have around reading documents, so for visually impaired individuals, that also often benefits neurodiverse individuals and individuals who have ADHD. And when we think about, how we structure interview processes, and and thinking about training interviews to be better, to eliminate bias, and potentially sharing interview questions beforehand or give their approach. Everyone benefits from people just being better and having a more inclusive mindset. And even this week, we published our gender pay gap this week, and one of the tables essentially ran off and didn't look very beautiful. And I said to the designer, like, "Oh, can you change this for me, please?" And her response straight off the bat was, "Well, you can if you want to, but then for individuals who use screen readers, they won't be able to read it. So are you sure you want to make that change?" And I was like, "No, absolutely not." And for that to be, say, embedded, that you're being challenged at all times across the organization, is the most impactful thing. And again, for everybody who uses, who might use a mobile phone to read our gender pay gap report, it wouldn't have been as digestible or easy to read for anybody, let alone just visually impaired individuals. The other thing I think that is really important is to keep talking and communicating about your commitment to diversity and inclusion, and also celebrating the business, customer success and business success that has come from it. As you bring diverse individuals into your organization and you see them thriving, make sure there's an ongoing commitment. I think that it's very easy to kind of scurry away and do all the work and then have these big bangs, but actually I think it is much more reassuring and trust building for the folks in your organization if they can see that it is an ongoing focus. And even what I would call the boring bits around, when you do pieces of analysis on pay and review, or when you're looking at your hiring funnel and dropout rates and so on, we will sometimes do sessions on that and be like, this is how we do it. And again, I'm not saying that everyone turns up and that it's really widely subscribed, but the feedback that I've had from individuals at Monzo is I don't often go, but I see it happens, and it just makes me feel good and makes me feel safe knowing that it happens. I'm like, great. And I think when we think about the future of D&I, over the next few years, that's going to be the thing that people are looking for, is are you resolute? Are you committed? But also, what is the impact and how is it being driven? And how do I see myself in this organization and the many different facets of myself as well?
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So another question for all of you. Do you have any kind of further thoughts you'd like to add before we open up to questions from the audience? Rosh, perhaps we could come to you first.
I guess my one thought I would add is you can work in a space so much and kind of have all the conversations, work at different organizations. For me, this conversation has given me lots of new thoughts and ideas, and I think it's just a reminder to keep looking outside. So you can think you have your path and the things you've learned and the way that you want to go, but hearing Tara and Lucas and Hannah, all of you talk today, it set things off in my mind just to think about things slightly differently, the power of actually leaning into other orgs and seeing what they do well. So just keeping that thinking and curiosity alive is probably my takeaway from the conversation.
Thank you. Lucas?
I would probably add one closing thought around the culture of companies in a way that they can give one another feedback at work. Sometimes I think in quite a lot of companies, we see that people are afraid to offend a colleague, and maybe they have second thoughts on the way or the timing of communicating the thought or feedback or something to improve. And I think to get diversity right, we have to get culture right. And to get culture right, we have to feel very comfortable and empowered and safe to give one another feedback by caring personally and challenging directly. And it's this really nexus of kind of the two different dynamics coming together that enable and empower employees to feel at home, to feel safe, and to bring their best and true self in the work environment. And so sometimes in the UK, I know we're a bit more shy in the way we give one another feedback, or we celebrate, or, there's a sense that perhaps bravado kind of, it's kind of condescending. It's not a good thing. Well, sometimes I think we have to celebrate the victories, and we have to celebrate being together and building amazing products for consumers. So that would be my closing remark for today.
Brilliant. Thank you. Tara?
My closing remark would just be that I think with most things related to diversity and inclusion, it can sometimes feel overwhelming and huge. Like you can't solve society, you can't solve all these things, right? And you are one person or a handful of individuals in an organization just really trying to make a difference. And whenever I'm feeling, I suppose, worried or concerned about progress or anything like that, the quote that always comes back to me is, never doubt for a second that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. In fact, it is the only thing that ever has. And it's a quote by a lady called Margaret Mead. And I think for me, that has always just been the thing, was just like, if you just commit to trying to improve things, like even incremental progress is still progress and worth celebrating. And rather than, I suppose, potentially feeling overwhelmed or feeling like worried about like everything out here, like take control of the thing that you can control, which is hopefully your organization, and drive the change that you can see, because ultimately the ripples in like go further than you could ever imagine, and hopefully people who leave your organization then go to another organization, and it spawns that way. And yeah, those would be my closing remarks.
Thank you. Hannah?
Thank you. It's really interesting hearing everyone say, and Lucas, what you said really resonated with me. Thank you. I think for me, and Lauren, this is something that's close to my heart. Is one thing that we're trying to focus on very much here at KPMG is the moment we lose people we don't want to lose. Now, of course, everybody moves on and changes jobs and various things, but there are statistics that tell us that at certain points in life, people leave, and often the people leaving are the very people in that diverse group that we don't want to leave. So typically women that have had children, how do we get them back to the workforce? People from ethnic, like diverse backgrounds that don't feel like they have a community, so they go somewhere where they do have a community. And then one that's coming more to the forefront is we're seeing so many women leave when they are embarking on the journey that is the menopause. So we are focused, and I think it needs to be much wider focus across the industry and across a wider group about how do we offer support to those people that are sat at home at night going, I can't do this anymore. And that's a really important thing for me personally, that I have a particular focus on, and we're working out here at KPMG how we offer that support to those groups so they feel that they have somewhere to go and that they can remain in a workforce and in an environment and contributing in the brilliant way that they do.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So I can see we've got some questions coming through from the audience, and please do post anything in the chat if you've got any questions you'd like to ask. So just taking the first one, says, while I completely support policy changes like extended parental leave, extending it to adoption as well, etc., and do believe that these are the right things to do, some of these changes can cause disruptions in the organisation. How have the panelists managed this at their respective organisations, and are there any learnings they would share? Would anyone like to kick off with that one?
I can have a go at this one, Lauren. I think what I find really interesting in this question is really kind of striking the right balance between freedom and responsibility. And so I think my experience at Zopa with some of our kind of employer value proposition initiatives, such as offering one of the largest work from anywhere policy of 120 days a year, is here's the freedom to choose. As Tara was saying, we give you something, and it's now your turn to have ownership of it, and you can tweak it, you can change it, you can adjust it in the way that suits your life and your unique personal circumstances. But then as a business, I think you have to be very clear of where the boundaries are. right? And so there's probably going to be a couple of red countries where you can't go because of what's happening around the world, or because of taxation issues. And I think just explaining this very, very clearly from the outset and having it kind of live and sit somewhere centrally where people can go and look for themselves is a very good first step to get that balance right.
Thank you. Anyone else got any thoughts on that one?
I think the thing I would add is it isn't easy. So it's being clear about that up front. And it's really hard to make something stick if you don't have the tough conversation with your leadership at the start to make sure you have buy-in. So I think that's just really important to recognize. Sometimes doing the right thing is not easy, but it's a compromise because you get something back. I think the trust and engagement and happiness you get from people when they feel cared for is invaluable. But it's also fine to talk about it being difficult. We've got a team at the moment that's a team of 10, and there are 3 paternity leaves at the same time. So that was funny timing, but it's difficult, but we're working it through because we said we'd look after them. So that's what we do.
Fantastic. Thank you. So just taking perhaps one of the other questions. So how can you build inclusivity into your culture in a way that is authentic? We hear a lot of positive words from leaders, but often organizations don't put those words into action. Would anyone like to take that one first?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Honestly, I think you have to unpack what that means when you say not put into practice, right? And I think, at least for me, there has to be, I'm getting into consequences. I was like, maybe I shouldn't say consequences, but there has to be a carrot and there also has to be a stick, right? That if you see in a manager's scores or whatever that they are not supporting the people in their team, and they're getting complaints, or we're seeing engagement is trending lower, there has to be some level of consequences or questions around why that is. And I think you can't galvanize genuine passion in people that isn't there, right? And if you try and do that, you're just going to waste your time. But instead, if you can direct them to, hey, can you see the benefits of this? To Rosh's point, even when it's hard, you can see the benefits of having a generous caregiver policy, right? Even when it's we implemented a sabbatical policy where people can go off fully paid for 8 weeks. Believe me, that is hard to manage at times, but it was the right thing to do for the business and for our people. And then when it comes to embedding it in the culture, you need people who are willing to be the culture ambassadors and call it out. And even in our onboarding session that I do with our new joiners every other week, the thing I say to them is you get to decide what Monzo's culture will be in 2 to 3 years, because ultimately it is the conversations that you have, it is the people that you ask when they say something a bit strange, or it's the questions the critical voice that you demonstrate that essentially builds the culture that we will have in the future. Again, I have a role, TS has a role of driving culture, but ultimately, if you see something happen, if you see something, say something, right? Or if you see something that's not working very well and you don't raise it as an opportunity to fix it or whatever, that then becomes our culture. And if there is this cultural gap, I think you really have to go down to your throughout your management levels, to your leadership levels, to say do you care about this? Do you see the value? And if you don't, and if they don't, explain it. And then after that, if they're still not buying into it, make sure that it is part of their review season. Is we expect you to be able to support people. We expect you to be able to demonstrate our culture and live our values. Otherwise, that is an element of underperformance and role.
Fantastic, thank you. Hannah, this might be more for you, and then others can jump in. So FinTech and financial services in general don't have a good track record on socioeconomic diversity. It's often seen as a sector for people from a certain background and education. How are you trying to address this for your employees, and any advice?
Thank you. Yeah, no, a great question, particularly for KPMG. So as I mentioned earlier, we published and we were one of the first in 2021 to publish that socio-economic background for our employees. And it's all very well, isn't it, publishing data, but what are we actually doing to sort of drive change? So our recruitment policies have changed so that there are sort of blind recruitment policies now. So we look less at people's education, more about who the person is and what role that they're actually applying for in our particular space. And in the financial services market in particular, I think we can all be honest and say it's predominantly sort of male dominated and has been for a number of years. So we are in our FinTech space at KPMG acting as role models in that financial services space as a team with female leadership and making people feel that they can actually step into the financial services sector. I suppose this probably a little less well known for things that we do at KPMG. That's something that stuck with me very close to my heart is we do offer work experience to a number of students, and we support a school in Tower Hamlets in particular offering work experience here at KPMG. But we as parents will, during work experience time, bring our kids into the office around that GCSEs moment where work experience is required. But if we do that, we also agree at the same time to support a candidate and a student coming in from a very different socioeconomic background. And I did this in particular this year gone with my daughter who came to work for a week, but then also a lovely gentleman that we supported through that social economic matching program that we have. And I received a text message back from him about 3 months ago, thanking me for his work experience for a week at KPMG and saying he's applied for a job here, whereas he never would have done 12 months ago because he didn't feel that he would fit in. So even just that one small thing makes a huge difference. So there is a good focus now at KPMG on actually supporting students from backgrounds so they feel that they are in a place where they can come and work at KPMG. And I'm really proud of that moment, actually.
Thank you, Hannah. Any other panelists like to comment on this one? Lucas?
Yeah, I mean, what Hannah said is really so true, and I can see it kind of deployed at work day in, day out. I would describe them as micro choices throughout, especially the hiring process. And when you're a hiring manager, you actually have the power to make these choices and go one way or another. And to do that, you need to have people around you who are going to be politely and gently challenging you, but kind of having that safe space to have a conversation about, what a good candidate looks like for this role. And so, do they not have a master's degree? Why would we not consider them? And it's these kind of biases, obviously, kind of the type of universities and Oxbridge and so on as well, that we have to talk about within the hiring team to make some of the best informed decisions. And but to do that, we need to have that open conversation about culture across the entire organization.
Brilliant, thank you. And perhaps we've got time for one more. So the question is, what are the top 3 most impactful initiatives that the panelists have seen being implemented to improve DE&I? But perhaps we could think about maybe 1 or 2 each if anyone's got any they'd like to share.
Hi, Lauren. Shall I go very quickly, and I'll just actually just say a couple of my two. One, the work experience, one that I just referred to earlier, but actually one that's really stuck with me that KPMG has implemented is when women are coming to the end of their maternity leave, and this is for women in particular, we offer them confidence support classes. Now, having had 3 maternity leaves myself, I know how terrifying it is to come back to work when you've had all of that time at home and you do lose your confidence. So that is a particular initiative for me that's really stuck and I find really helpful and hugely support.
Thank you. Rosh?
Sure. So I think the one I'll talk to, and I'm a big buyer of business accountability, is I think as we talked to, I think targets are great, but they can be very binary, and they can encourage a very kind of one-track view. What I've seen work really well is organizations that have senior managers have a DEI target that allows them to interpret it. So rather than a percentage or a number, it's about one of their objectives is to do something meaningful that contributes to DEI. And that puts the onus on them to be able to talk about what they've done rather than to turn to HR to talk about it. So I think that's really important and allows someone to interpret it in a way that's meaningful to them rather than taking a crude target and perhaps compromising intersectionality.
Thank you. Tara?
I spoke about it earlier, but I think our pregnancy loss policy has been the biggest thing for folks who have experienced it, but also those who haven't. Protected time away in the event of pregnancy loss in any circumstance for the person who's lost the child, but also the partner, has just been huge for our organisation and helping people talk about the different ways that people may need time away from work. It was a policy that took us all of about maybe 20 minutes to write, and it got through really quickly. But honestly, the feedback that we got from across the organization was just this just feels like the kind of organization I want to be part of. It's a really big career highlight for me.
Fantastic, thank you. And Lucas?
I think there's probably like a range of initiatives and things that could work well. And if I'm trying to conceptualize and organize them in my head, you start from kind of low effort, high impact, and then you move towards high impact, low impact, high effort. Some very, very simple things could work pretty well in the organization, such as issuing like a CEO statement internally through internal comms messaging channels about a specific topic that relates to D&I. And making it in writing and then posting it either on social media, on LinkedIn, or if you want to keep it internal, just post it on your internal systems. That I've seen has an enormous impact on the way people feel heard and their sense of belonging to the company, because they know that this topic has been discussed from at the very high kind of level of the C-suite and then trickles down. And I'm not saying that's the kind of long-term plan for everything, but just showing that we're listening and we're taking people's kind of concerns and needs into account is a very, very good low-effort step to get going.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So I just think from my side, some key takeaways from the brilliant discussion have been thinking about diversity, equity and inclusion as a horizontal across the business and really making sure that's embedded into organisations and ensuring that's rewarded. And it feels like great progress within the fintech industry has been made to date, but looking forwards, this kind of focus on intersectionality, I think will be key. So it just leaves me to say a huge thank you to our fantastic panelists for joining us today to share their insights. And thanks very much for everyone for listening. And Amelia, I shall hand back to you to close.
Thank you so much, Lauren, Hannah, Lucas, Rosh, Tara. It's been incredible. I leave here with also some thoughts and advocating for more role models, for more conversations around these topics, for sharing more these best practices. I think it has been incredible to hear what you are doing for celebrating our victories, something that's very important, for providing support and also for creating this culture that makes us feel that we belong to the party. I really like that analogy. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And if you want to know, thank you for our, the people who attended the webinar as well. And if you want to know more about the events that we run throughout the year, you can check on our website, innovatefinance.com. And talking about events, we have IFGS coming soon, 29th of April at the Guildhall. So hopefully I'm going to see you all there. Thank you so much and see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.